at the same time, I was doing a series of films called Seven Men. They were character studies of various people, mostly unknown. And then I was introduced in Soho to Quentin Crisp. And I thought, right, you know, here's something I can make a film about. And I did. 2 or 3 years after that, Jack Gold, who was a colleague, an old friend of mine, made a drama based on Quentin's book, which was called The Naked Civil Servant. And John Hurt played Quentin, and it was an enormous success, marvelous. And it was funny, because I left, my film left Quentin sad in his dusty little room, filthy, wanting death, only wanting death. And then suddenly this play came out. He was rushed to New York, money in his pocket, marvelous. But I'm quite sure that Quentin is still exactly the same as he was when I finished my film, untouched. That was a sad thing about Quentin. He said himself that he was a finished work of art, self-made work of art. The sort of person you could walk round and round and look at, and nothing ever changed.
This is the window from which on a clear day you can see normality. This room is not only a room in a boarding house, but also a ward, a private ward in a home for incorrigibles. And then again, it's a cell. And here I've remained for 30 years, and whatever has gone by in the outer world has passed me by. But I think if anyone said to me, if you go on like this, life will pass you by, I would reply, thank God for that. I nearly got mixed up in the beastly thing. Offer you a huge, great glass of stout.
Cool.
I drink this stuff at dawn because it makes the day shorter.
It's all a bit dusty, Quentin.
True. Unkind friends say that I have the dust sent in from Fortnum and Mason's, but that's not true. I merely don't clean the place. And I have a message of hope to offer to the housewives of England. It's this: don't lose your nerve, because after the first 4 years, the dirt won't get any worse. I haven't cleaned this place since I came here, and that's nearly 30 long, dark years ago. And as you see, it merely doesn't look clean, that's all.
What does your landlady say?
My landlady is the last saint left alive. This is the only house in the world which is run for the benefit of the lodgers. We all do exactly as we please. The price you pay is that, of course, you live on the coconut matting level. I don't ever shop now because I found I needn't. My clothes are given to me. In fact, I'm a sort of one-man Oxfam. But Food, it was more of a problem until I discovered you could buy stuff at a chemist, which you could eat without ever buying anything from food shops. And I don't bother anymore. Buy this stuff, and you mix it up. It's sort of a whitish powder, and you mix it up until it's the color of wolfamure. And it tastes like wolfamure too. But it's full of vitamins and full of protein, and you don't have to bother ever again. The great barrier between me and the outer world is my appearance. And my appearance is mild now compared with what it was like 40 years ago, when my hair was hennaed, my eyelids were gold, my fingernails and my toenails were gold, and I was blind with mascara and dumb with lipstick. Sometimes it led to my being beaten up, mauled about, and sometimes actually beaten up. But this, of course, I had to expect. My way of going on is a protest, and the beating up is a counter-protest. It is people's way of saying that they don't accept the way that I am. Of course, some of the things that happen to me in the street are not savage, they're just sad. At least they're sad to me. They reveal a nature more peculiar, more lonely than my own. On one occasion I was on a bus and I looked down at the bus stop, and there was one of those Canadians or Australians or New Zealanders, a man with a hat, you know, like this road sweeper's hat, and he got on the bus. And looking in the window of the bus, it was night time, I could see what was going on behind me. And he came and sat down, and then he stood behind me, and I thought, I wonder what's going to happen. And he produced a comb from his pocket, and as the bus swayed on its journey all the way down to Knightsbridge, he combed my hair. I never said a word, I never turned, and neither did he. And afterwards people said he was drunk, which is absurd, because he could understand the architecture of my hair, which is more than I can. Well, the war, of course, was a happy time, and everything was much, much better. First of all, people were kinder, because they thought that God might be watching them, and then it was darker. And everyone, of course, wore the same clothes that I wore. In fact, a policeman once came up to me in the street and said, "You can't go about like that." And I said, "Why not?" I was dressed in trousers. And he said, "Because you look exactly like a woman." And I said, "I'm wearing trousers." And he said, "Well, women wear trousers." And I said, "I can't help it if other people are eccentric." And he went away. Well, you must understand with everything I say that I'm speaking, first of all, for myself and then for a group. I'm a minority within a minority. I'm an effeminate homosexual. And for people like me, the dream, the hope, the ambition is to win and to keep the love of a real man. And of course, the essence of a real man is that he does not fall in love with people of his own sex. Therefore, it's insoluble, it's unanswerable. This doesn't prevent homosexuals from hammering away at the problem. They simply become more feverish. They pile the makeup on thicker. They sway more from side to side. They camp more outrageously. And of course, the more they do this, the more the desired object recedes. I would definitely like to have been a woman, because I feel, whether rightly or wrongly, that then everything would have fallen into place. The way I speak, the way I walk, the way I move, and the thoughts in my head would not any longer have been remarkable. They would have been acceptable. What I'm so bad at is being a man.
Friendship, Quentin. Do you value it?
Oh, I value friendship more than I can say, much more than I value sex. I would never dream of abandoning even a simple social date just to rush after some strange man. But I don't mean by that that I trust people or I want them to trust me, because trust is the death of friendship. It's such a burden. It gives you this feeling of guilt all the time, exactly as it did in childhood. I don't mean only in my childhood, in anyone's childhood. What happens is you're put on your honor not to do this, that, and the other. Then you commit some crime, some sin, and then you've done two things. You've broken the bathroom window and you've broken your word.
Well, perhaps you're a Puritan. After all, you don't drink, really. No sex, no food, no music, no money, no nothing, really.
No, nothing, yes. I'm an ascetic of a kind, except, of course, I'm lazy. And therefore I'm guilty of the sin of sloth. I'm a Puritan by intention. In fact, one of the coins with which I tried to buy back the respect that I'd lost was to go in for a life of chastity, and I wouldn't have done this if I hadn't been fundamentally a Puritan. I would say that I was, by nature, invincibly middle class. And so were my parents. We lived in suburbia, and they were middle class and middle-brow, middling people. And that accounts for their attitude toward me. The moment my father clapped eyes on me, he decided to go on as though nothing unpleasant had happened. My mother tried to cope, and I think she tried very well, but she was completely bewildered. And the sad thing is that as they'd never seen the rest of the world, they alternately threatened me with it and offered it to me. But they never said, when you grow up, you will meet people as mad as yourself, and I can only hope you get on all right with them. This they never said. So that I was frightened from the word go. They, the real people, were out there, and I was here.
Quentin, have you a photograph of yourself as a young man?
If it's anywhere, it'll be up here. Like a picture, isn't it? This it is. Fine. There's that one.
Oh, yeah.
Quite gay. It was taken in the middle of Oxford Street, and you can tell because the hair is dark that this was taken before I was 40, when my hair was red. Taken by a street photographer, and of course, as soon as I saw him, I went like this, but later it transpired he was a sort of hooligan like ourselves. Anyway, it seems quite nice. When I was walking about the street like this, my brother and a girlfriend of his passed me in the street, about that far away, and she said, "Look at that!" And he said, "I've seen it before."
You must have had some extraordinary things happen to you.
Well, yes, I have indeed. Most of them slightly unpleasant, but some of them just frank curiosity. People will come up to me and say, I simply must ask you who you are. Or on one occasion, I was already sitting down in a carriage in a train going, I think, to Guildford, and the porter opened the door like that and said, "You'll excuse me, I must ask you what you do for a living." And I said, "I'm a model." And he said, "Oh," shut the door like that, and the train went down. The main field of activity for a model nowadays is the housewife's choice classes. The students arrive with the celery sticking out of one end of the basket and their paintbrushes sticking out of the other. And they draw you in memory of the time gone by. I think what has happened is people have got lonely, their children are grown up, and they think of a way of filling in the time. And then they think, when was I happiest? And that was when they were at the school, and they practically get out the Hungarian blouses they wore in 1926, and their sandals and their curtain ring earrings, and they come to the class. And that is when, of course, I'm more useful than another model, because I pose in loving mummery. I pose for the time gone by. The poses are like this, you see, instead of my just sitting around as though I was a human being, because it's easier for me to pose than not.
But how did you earn a living in the old days?
I was a commercial artist, and I was a model. In commercial art, I had a lovely time, but of course the other employees were a bit frightened. In fact, when I worked in one place, when the girl came up to give me the work that I was supposed to do for that day, her hands were trembling like this so that the pages were fluttering, and I tried not to look at her while I received the work, to try and give her time to get her breath back. This is a normal reaction almost anywhere.
She got used to you?
Bit by bit, she got used to me. Never quite. She didn't ever get used to the fact of my existence, and she once said, "Has it ever occurred to you, you might be mad?" I was forced to take up commercial art because, though it may be true that artists have a peculiar appearance, it's also true that people with peculiar appearances are compelled to take up art. And that is why I've done this kind of thing, and written books, plays, short stories, because that was all I could do. I can live in this room and eat without ever spending more than £5 a week. Could live wildly, a life of debauchery on £5 a week. But my main debauch is going to the movies. That costs more than it would cost other people because I have to take somebody with me. Because I'm worried about what God would say if he found me in the movies. You see, if he were to plunge his arm down through the roof of the Odeon cinema and say, "And you, Crisp, what are you doing here?" I couldn't reply, "I'm enjoying myself, Lord." But if there's someone with me, I go, and then he knows I've committed an act of self-sacrifice.
Quentin, you told me about an argument you had with a drunk in the street, and he said, "You mean you go with men for money?" And your reply was, "Well, possibly." Does that mean that you've been a male prostitute?
Yes, I've been a male prostitute, and this worries people. Prostitution in general worries people. And I can't understand this because, to me, the only excuse that you can find for the disgrace of sex is that there might be money in it. Otherwise, it's a wanton form of self-enjoyment. You know what you know who thinks about happiness. You've got to be able to explain it in some way. For whatever is done for money is sacred. In fact, the best way I can express the whole thing is to quote the char of a friend of mine. She took a house somewhere in London without knowing that it was a disreputable district. But she had a char who knew not only that it was disreputable, but who was disreputable with whom and why and for how much. And one day she plucked at my friend's sleeve and took her to the window and said, "You see that one, madam? Women that do it for money are bad enough, but she does it to oblige."
Do you believe in anything?
Not really. I wouldn't have said I was a cynic, but I suppose I am to some people. After all, an act of faith is the believing in something which isn't self-evident. And I can believe in what is here, but that's nothing. Any fool can believe in what is self-evident. It takes a genius to believe in what is a palpable lie.
What about human relationships?
I couldn't really say I believe in human relationships. I know they exist, but I couldn't say that they're a thing to be sought. I must know 150 women well enough for them to tell me the story of their lives. And when I meet them in the street, before they've said hello, long before they've said how are you, they've said, "What do you think he's done now? What do you think he said today?" And it doesn't give you the feeling that human relationships are worthwhile.
What do you mean by the word love?
Now, I would say that love was the extra effort you make in your dealings with people whom you do not like. We must work away at the unlovable, chiefly. We must use our love, if it's going to be any use at all, it must make a world in which everyone is equally beautiful, equally desirable, equally lovable. That's the only work we can do with it. Of course, we shan't really feel this, but we must go on as though we did.
How do you relate this to marriage? I mean, the ordinary marriage.
You can't, of course, make this work in marriage because you can only marry one person at a time. And therefore, it's bound to break down. But marriage will soon cease altogether, won't it? I mean, jealousy is already out. In a movie in which somebody has to act the part of a jealous man, he has to act like mad to get a modern audience to believe in it. I mean, in Phaedra, for instance, the hero acts as though he was jealous, but a modern man whose wife said, "I've had an affair with your son," would say, "Oh, you are a scream, what was it like?" And so, obviously, marriage is on the way out. And when it goes out, things will be better. Victorian marriages worked because only one person was expected to be happy. Then later came a marriage in which both parties were expected to enjoy themselves, which is absurd. You've only got to want the bathroom window open and your wife wants it shut, and there's nothing left except divorce.
What do the young make of you these days?
Well, the young more or less accept my appearance because it's so very like their own. When it annoys them, it's because they feel that I am too old to dress in a modern Carnaby Street way. And they feel that I'm sort of have become the oldest teenager in the business. And this is true. I see this. Only, of course, I am where I always was. I'm doing and saying and wearing the same things that I did and said and wore 40 years ago. My appearance and my conversation are like a stopped clock. They're right once every 12 years. Only nobody bothers to consult them. The other thing that annoys them is that their appearance can be described as effeminate, and they don't want this to happen. And when they see me, they see just how effeminate it could be thought to be, just moving it a tiny bit to one side. They have long hair, they have bright clothes, they wear beads, and you still know that they are not homosexual. And even when you don't, they think you do. If if they've lost their nerve, they wear beards. The problem of the young is, to my mind, always the same: how to conform and rebel at the same time. And this they've now solved. They rebel against their parents and conform with one another. I'm terribly glad to have lived into a time when happiness is for the people who can use it. Because when I was young, happiness was for the middle-aged. And that's a contradiction in terms. Nobody who's middle-aged can say they're happy. Or if they can, they must be using a different word. They must, I would have said, mean content. I could say even now, in the winter of my life, that I'm content. But I wouldn't say I was happy. I think happiness is a physical thing. I don't think you can be happy from doing good in the world or any of those other things. I think you can only be happy by living consciously, here and now. You can't be happy because you're going somewhere. You must be happy because you're putting one foot in front of the other. If you can't do that and that at will, you can never, never hope to be happy, at least not in your fingertips.
You wouldn't say that being good has something to do with being happy.
I would say that morality is the opposite of happiness. If you're stuck with, you know who, you can't expect to be happy. You can remember how angry he was at the faintest suggestion that anyone was happy. Take dreary old sex. Be ye made eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. How far can you go?
Now you're getting old, Quentin. But you might live another 30 years, mightn't you?
Yes, modern science is so unkind that I could live for 30 years without anyone even noticing. It wouldn't be remarkable in any way. And this, of course, is the great problem. This is why I think there should be a ministry of death, and that they should make up their minds how long people are to live. And when they've decided that, then you would just stay in your home and a notice would come, like your income tax form, and it would say, would you kindly call at the forgetting chamber of the town hall on September the 25th, which we note will be your 65th birthday, or whatever it is. And then a plain van would come, and you would step in and you would go away, and everything would be marvelous. You could apportion your income. You would think, well, I've only got another 4 or 5 years to do, so I know how to spend my income. But I have to carry on alarming. This whole cupboard is full of clothes, not that I can wear now, but that I may one day have to wear, which I daren't throw away because the night is coming. And up there are more. Now I've done and said all I can do and say. I've come to the end of my personality. And now if I want anything, it's peace, quiet, the ability, the opportunity to stay in my room and just stagger on. I suppose what I want in a way is death.
Cut.
If you're on a tightrope, when you first set off, you don't know how much play there is in the rope. But when you get into the middle, between the ages of 20 and 40, the thing rocks like mad, and it's too late to go back, even to look back. But if you go on as carefully as you can, you see the other platform. And then you just make a dash for it, not bothering with what the audience thinks, or waving your arms, or looking dangerous and difficult and prodigious. What you seize hold of when you get to the other side is, in fact, the edge of your coffin. And you get into it, and you lie down. And you think, my cuffs are frayed, I haven't written to my mother, and all those other things. And then you think, it doesn't matter, because I'm dead. And this is a message of hope. It will come to an end. It will come. We cannot be blamed for it, and we shall be free.